What do you think makes a person conservative as opposed to liberal? Like what factors go into that to make that happen?
Fear mostly. This has been shown in studies too. It's not just me being essentializing it, but conservatives have a naturally higher fear response. By naturally, I don't mean like inherently. Obviously, socialization plays a role in this. But yeah, they have a higher fear response. Like immigration, for example, like it just sets off fear and disgust. Those are the big ones.
So are you talking about the amygdala study?
Possibly. I'd have to go back and look at it. I don't remember its name. It's been a while.
There was
it was like a very strong correlation.
Yeah, there was a correlation between the larger amygdalas generally were conservative because of disgust and fear. Exactly. That's why
I don't know how much of it. Yeah, I don't know how much of it is like an inherent biological thing that can't be changed, or how much of it is just is like a product of socialization that amplifies pre-existing differences in people's biology. But yeah, unfortunately, it does seem to be a pretty significant, it seems to be a pretty significant difference. Unfortunately, I don't like to think that about people. I always like to think people's minds can be changed with a good argument. But
well, it actually helped me because I used to get really upset at people. I couldn't understand why they were thinking what they were thinking, and I'm not saying that I think they're like mentally ill or something. I just think I can now understand why, possibly, if it's real, if it's true, why they feel the way they do, and it helped me get more tolerance towards people that think completely differently than me by knowing, oh, I have a large amygdala. I don't know. It's just, for some reason, it helped me, and if it's true.
I get you. It's definitely difficult to reconcile with, no matter what. I think.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you say you feel like people's minds can be changed, right? Because I've talked to a lot that don't feel like that, you can have all the facts, you can go back and forth, and you're just, if you go into a conversation, you're unlikely to change somebody's mind. So what makes you feel like you're able to move somebody, and can you point that out?
Well, it's kind of the point of what I do. So I feel like I'd have to be exceptionally cynical to not feel that way. I have to hope, right? When I argue with conservatives and their audiences see it, I always hope that leads to a positive outcome at the end of the day.
Oh, I can help you answer this question. Rena, how do you feel about guns?
Oh, you mean this story that I told you?
No. I sent you a video of Vaush about, and I said I was really opposed to guns, and I wanted a lot of gun laws, and he had a really good argument, I thought, on why that wouldn't work. And I assume, since you may not have watched it, you still believe there should be gun laws. I could be wrong.
I mean, I think I've gone back and forth on that one, but I think like right now where I am is I feel like you drive a car, you should have a license, and there should be some kind of accountability, and responsibility around it. But I don't think everything should be banned. I think like you have things for, like I said, operating a vehicle and everything, but you don't have all that in place.
That's an example where he changed my mind. So
for me, it's mostly a matter of political capital. There are so many guns already in this country, and people feel so strongly about them. And there are so many other ways to address the negative externality of guns, that the idea of I feel like we could place a really strong wedge to pull conservatives and libertarians over by not being like super anti-gun or whatever. It just seems like politically inefficacious. It would be like, I don't know, in a policy perspective, I feel like banning like high fructose corn syrup would also be really good. But in terms of political expediency, like it would be led by like the most American opposition movement in all of history, like of all the food companies linked arm in arm with everyone who's ever enjoyed any food sold in this fucking country, because they would, they'd get all the TV ads about how liberals are taking away their tasty syrup. And it's just a matter of what you can actually get done. To finish your point, with changing people's minds. You don't change people's minds with a better argument for the most part. Sometimes, but not always. Most of the time, in my experience, the best way to change a person's mind is to establish yourself as a reputable source of information, as somebody worth listening to, and then plant the seeds of a different perspective in their head and wait for them to bloom. People are very defensive. The idea of just like listening to a guy shouting online, you're going to change your mind on something you care about. Very unlikely. Very, very unlikely. But if you make yourself come off like this cool person, like you're cool, you're trustworthy, you're reputable, you're funny, people are more likely to open up and think like, okay, maybe I disagree with him on this point, but I'll hear him out. They hear you out, and after that, you've got a way better shot at changing their mind than you ever would if you were some antagonist trying to force a new perspective down their throat.
So it does sound like you use, some of the things that I've discussed with people, because you're building a trust and rapport then, right? And then kind of easing your way in, rather than like, you're not hoping that in one moment, one interaction, you're going to change somebody's mind.
Yeah, that will very, very rarely happen unless both people are coming at something from a strictly empirical perspective, which is almost never the case. Maybe sometimes in academia, this could be the case. Even if you look in academia, people like will die on a hill and burn their careers to the ground because they can't accept that their data was wrong. Like even people dealing with empirical information in an empirical field, when proven empirically wrong, they still won't accept when they're wrong sometimes. It's just humans are just really bad at readjusting their perspective in line with new information. We're just like really bad at it, like borderline inherently. So
when you're talking with somebody that is very far to the polar opposite of you, like say you're talking to somebody that is a white supremacist, and you're being very I would say borderline hostile at some point once they've provoked you, like I would say, yeah. I mean, you usually start out pretty cool, and then they say some stuff that's just, all right, that's it. And then it's kind of like there's a switch that goes off. Are you not hoping to change their mind, or are you doing it for the audience?
Well, sometimes, most of the time, really, it's for the audience. I mean, one person I'm talking to versus thousands that are listening. Usually it's to my betterment to focus on the larger crowd. But in terms of changing a person's mind directly, in a way, if they disagree with me, they're kind of like a proxy for people listening who might disagree with me, and I've noticed, especially for far right people, that I said you have to establish yourself as a trustworthy figure. Well, one thing conservatives really, really like is strength. Posing strength is really important for them. And a lot of them, and you see this in far right circles especially, they really get off on the idea that they're like these like aggressive uber warriors who are different than those cucked liberals and conservatives, that they're strong and uncucked and they're always right and blah blah blah. They don't value introspection or like growing or learning that much. So I find it's often really effective to tear them down by being meaner than they can be, funnier than they can be, unflappable, because a lot of these people have emotional issues, right? Like it's not as though like Klan rallies and neo-Nazi groups are full of the most emotionally upstanding people. Like a lot of these people are desperate for some kind of role in life. Like they're looking for validation from people, anybody, no matter how they can get it. So it's not like they're like the toughest group to crack or whatever. So anyway, you posture, you show you're stronger, you're funnier, you're not bothered by them, they're bothered by you, blah, blah, blah. And when you do that, maybe the person you're talking to won't change their mind. That's pretty tough to guarantee, but maybe other people who are listening, they'll hear all that and they'll think like, oh, well, maybe that guy was a cucked loser, maybe I would have done better in their position. But when they grow critical of that person who represents them, they grow more critical of themselves. That's the point. Everyone is an XP for everyone else, just to varying degrees. And if you can make them distrustful of people on their side, you can make them distrustful of their own positions. And that, I hope, would lead to introspection.
Do you feel like you have some people in your community now that have like come over from other spaces or from some of these conversations?
A lot of people in my community are former like alt-righters or conservatives or skeptics or libertarians. Yeah, like a lot. Usually when we poll in my chat, the answer is like around a third of them which I think is a pretty remarkable number for like a left-leaning content creator. I don't think there are many current conservatives who watch me at the moment. Usually, I think that's a pretty marginal portion of my audience because it's been a while since I've broken off and fractured another person's community, like Sargon's or whatever. But it'll happen again.
So how far, like when they switch over, how dramatically do their views change? That's interesting coming from far right. And then now do they actually consider themselves on the left?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with why they were far right. Because I've had convos with like former alt-righters in my community. And the common narrative that I see basically is that they were feeling frustrated by problems in the world and they misattributed it to issues that the far right would get them to see. And I helped them see that those issues were caused by other things and that their lives were being made worse by the far right. So like this is one of the reasons why there's like almost a stereotype of people who used to be far right who are now like trans girls, you know, because a lot of people often who feel frustrated with their masculinity, like their masculinity is challenged or they don't feel secure or comfortable in it, will overcompensate by participating in the politics of ultra masculinity of the far right, you know. But if you break that down and it's like, okay, well, are you this, are you happy, you know, this, that, the other, well, then it's kind of like a snowball rolling down a hill. I really do feel like a lot of far right people at their like heart are good people, who are just, they've just been given the wrong information on the world, given the wrong problems, and they're responding to it, of course, in the way you would expect somebody to when given all the wrong info by the wrong people. I think they can be moved over. There are people whose politics are like pretty much entirely based on disgust and hatred, like explicit, fervent hatred. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a mental illness. I think those people should be in fucking loony bins. You know, I don't know if those people can be moved over quite as much. Sometimes maybe, but for the most part, those people seem like lost causes. I think they're minorities, though, in the far right.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that, that if there isn't like malicious behind it, you know, people just have the wrong information, you can move them. But if they're just, it's solely based on hate, you know, then that seems highly unlikely that you're going to move those folks.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's possible. I mean, you know, oftentimes I've noticed the biggest pattern for people who are super ultra hateful, at least in the modern world today, like with the alt-right or whatever, it seems to be like basically they feel like their society is being torn apart by X minority group, whether it be gays or trans people or like the Jews or whatever. You know, they feel like everything is being ruined by them. And they feel contemptuous because not only is everything being torn apart, but um the like mainstream media won't like let them talk about it or whatever, and that contempt broils over into hatred, and as a product of that, you know, they become very performatively cruel, and that's really tough to break into, I think, because I think the emotional impulses that lead to that are very ugly, but it is possible. It's just, you know, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Some people are, everything's a spectrum to me. And there are people that you, on the far end of a spectrum of being able to be talked into stuff, and they're just so far over there, there's nothing you can do. But I think what you're saying, you know, when you're talking to someone that's like that, you might be helping people that are closer to the middle, seeing the 2 points and hearing your points are more logical.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always that middle, right? You know, a lot of people who are part of far right communities are not themselves what we would consider far right. They're more like sympathetic to the far right. It's the same with the far left, right? Like I would consider myself far left. Not every person in my community is a communist, not even close, probably less than half, honestly. A lot of them are like, you know, reformist socialists who are sympathetic to my ideology, or liberals who think that a lot of my arguments are on board, even if they don't agree with all of my end state prescriptions. So you know, there's always there's always so much room to work with, you know.
Why do you think so many people on the left and you know, influencers have such an issue with you?
There are two parts to it. One is that I don't give ground. I'm a very headstrong person, you know. I talk about the left, you know, being super argumentative or hateful towards me, but like, let's be real, if I was a far right creator, I would have already burned all those bridges too. Like if I believed politically like far right stuff, I don't think that I'd be getting along with everything in that space either. I'm pretty sure that a lot of this has to do with me being like a very like contentious person and headstrong. But I do think there is something particular about the left, and unfortunately, and this sounds really dumb, but I do think it's true, I think a lot of it is on the left. People are used to people like me being quiet. There's kind of an expectation that people who are cis or white or men should kind of like be deferential to the voices of marginalized groups. And there is a truth behind that. I think it's valid to say that, you should listen, you should be considerate, you should inform your perspective. But sometimes that sentiment is misused when the real message is something like don't speak up at all. When there are disagreements, like on the online left, if you disagree with like a black queer woman, you got to give a good goddamn argument for why. If you disagree with a white boy like me, all you have to do is say like, you're speaking too loud, like you need to listen to marginalized voices when they disagree with you, and that's it. You can pretty much leave it at that, and that like overwhelmingly people are going to agree with that perspective. They're going to side with you saying that. So I think that's a little bit frustrating. I think people with privilege should use their privilege, weaponize it to support marginalized groups, and I do my best to do that.